Jakub, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh,
Uh,
it's my pleasure, Jamie. No, it's really a pleasure for me to be over here, and also, it will be pleasure to, let's put it this way, share our side of the story, what's happening with Kratom in Europe, because the situation over here looks very bleak at times, sometimes, but we have a first ray of hope that we might be able to see some regulation of kratom in coming months.
wow, that's fascinating. I am just, I started this podcast back in August last year. So I've just been starting to follow the details of kratom legislation in the US. Now I'm
Mhm.
learning about Europe and it's a whole nother thing. So I was thinking, if you're all right with it, if you could just give people a bit about your background, tell you about yourself a little bit and how you came to be with the European Kratom Alliance.
All right. About my background. I am a person who is political in our organization, so to say. Generally, I am a person who graduated three different universities, and I have technically four different degrees. My first degree was in political science in 2011 from University of Warsaw, where I am originally from. Then my second degree is from Maastricht University. That's the south of the Netherlands. I graduated here my second undergrad with European law. And finally, in 2019, I did a double master with public policy and human development from United Nations University Merit. It might sound fancy, but it's basically just another school at Maastricht University that has accreditation from the UN.
Wow.
And what is a funny coincidence, I have to say, is that I started working actually for European Kratom Alliance more or less around the same time when you started podcast. So it would
Oh.
be more or less August last year. It was the time when in the Kratom community here in Europe, there were rumors about WHO attempting to prohibit kratom internationally. And frankly, nobody knew what's going on. Like nobody knew what's going on or what's gonna happen. And because I was the only person that some Kratom people knew, who understands more or less how international institutions work, and also how the government work and how to communicate with the government. Eventually, I just introduced them with a very short project, what needs to be done. And over there, I was hinting very heavily at creation of a trade association that would be defending interests of kratom consumers and also vendors in European Union, as well as establishing some standards like good manufacturing practice for kratom, because we are still missing that on European continent. And like the need of European legislation is slightly different than, well, let's say, what you can get in KCPA in the United States. Like we will have to draft a completely new legislative proposal in order to appease our regulators in the European Union and also in the national governments. But we will talk a little bit about that later on.
Yeah. No, thanks. It's
So
fascinating.
yeah, like generally, I remember like last August, it was a panic, like in terms of everybody was freaking out what's gonna happen now with Kratom as such, if it's going to be banned or not, what should we do, what shouldn't we do. And so eventually, I was invited for a meeting. I wrote a two-pager, I remember. And after that, one of the guys that is co-founding European Kratom Alliance asked me if I want to lead the project. I said yes, and that's how it started. Officially, we founded European Kratom Alliance at the beginning of December. because of the legislative paperwork preparing, and also gathering different kratom vendors from all over Europe. There are not that many countries. However, the difference between, say, USA and Europe is that kratom market is very diffused,
Hmm.
and we are still learning about new vendors pretty much popping in left and right in different countries of European Union where kratom is still legal.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
because like
fascinating.
yeah, like the biggest concern for people who are consuming kratom and also for people who are selling kratom are national prohibitions.
Hmm.
Because so whenever we are discussing this from the standpoint of say American legislation, in American legislation you guys have a little bit more relaxed.
Right.
Like whenever a product is released on the market, it can be released without any testing or with very minimal testing, and
Right.
eventually later on it will be regulated by the state or by the federal government. In Europe, situation is drastically different. First, the product needs to undergo a lot of different tests in order to be let on the market, and then eventually we can sell it for human consumption. But the reality is that officially, whenever we are selling kratom in Europe, there's not a single European country, with exception of Nordics, where kratom would be allowed for human consumption. But then again, in Scandinavian countries, kratom is considered a heavily regulated substance. So the problem is that you need the doctor's prescription over there. In the rest of Europe, it's very much a different story because it also depends if we are talking about countries that are member states of European Union, or if we are talking about outside of the EU. So no, that really varies, so to say.
Wow, that's so interesting. I had a feeling that the situation was completely different than the US, but I had no idea. I mean, the layers there, even just the aspect of to introduce any sort of product for human consumption, it basically almost starts off illegal till it can be proven that it's something that could be legal. It's kind of like the opposite.
Yeah, like generally, when it comes to regulatory framework in Europe, we have a lot of different requirements, especially for food like products uh, or anything that is allowed for human consumption. Otherwise, we are unable to sell it, or eventually we can sell it, but not for human consumption or as something else. So, for example, when it comes to kratom under European legislation, kratom is legal as an ingredient for cosmetics. So, for
Oh.
example, it's okay to make different cosmetics that have contact with skin, but
Mm.
whenever it comes to human ingestion, that's completely illegal. And depending on that, how we want to resolve it, we have a couple of different ideas how we want to do it. But still, it's gonna take us some time because as the organization, we are fresh. Basically, we just exist for 3 months officially. And already we are in negotiations with one of European governments to begin regulation of kratom over there.
Mm.
Like
Wow.
I cannot disclose at the moment with which government, but I can say it's in Central Eastern Europe.
Okay. Okay. Wow, that's so interesting. And so can you help clarify something for me? How does being in the EU versus not being in the EU come into play here? Because it sounds like that
Mm-hmm.
has something to do with kratom regulation in addition to countries individually.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say no. I will try to make it sound very simple. Uh, European Union is kind of like our federal government. It's not really a government because EU is more of international institution. However, when it comes to the EU, we have the rule of supremacy of European law over national law in a lot of different domains.
Oh.
So basically, whenever something is being regulated by the European Union, that's about 60 to 70% of legislation of member states. Then basically when EU makes a decision about something, then it's a blanket decision that covers the entire territory of the European Union. And this is apparently very important when it comes to agri-food. So agricultural products, food, and anything that is related to that. It's one of the exclusive competences of European Union. Like, don't quote me on that because I am not sure of it here 100%. But generally, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, agriculture, food, European Union plays a very huge role in regulating and legislating that next to European governments. So European governments usually are the ones that are making the first decisions individually when something doesn't come on agenda of the European Commission. But eventually, whenever something is being regulated by European Commission, then it's essentially the same, say, like FDA would finally decide to regulate kratom in the United States. So basically, there wouldn't be much to that what national government would want to say if they would want to oppose the regulation.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. On your website, it says there's a lot of misinformation and misconception about kratom around Europe. We spread the knowledge about kratom and fight disinformation about our beloved plant. We advocate for your right to consume kratom safely and responsibly. Is what kind of, like in the US, there are opponents of kratom and proponents, and not many, it's become more of a thing in the public eye recently, but I think a lot of the opponents of kratom go by the information that our FDA puts out there and Health and Human Services, which it doesn't really take into account like more recent research. It's all like old research with very big flaws in the research, and none of them reference the World Health Organization recent decision not to do the critical review process. And so I'm interested to know, like in Europe, do you find that there's kind of a blindness to new information that's coming out about kratom? Like the places that keep it illegal, like do they not want to have updated information or to consider it? Or is there an openness to considering, taking off that law on kratom that might exist at the moment?
Like over here, I cannot really give you a clear answer because the situation is very opaque with this in that regard. Generally, when it comes to European countries, the attitude towards drugs or narcotics or any kind of substances that are fairly unknown for the European government, the default mode is to ban it. So a lot of national bans that we are dealing with appeared at least like 10 or 11 years ago. For example, my home country has banned mitragynine somewhere around 2011 when it wasn't even known under in Europe as such. Like it was a very underground substance. Still, kratom in Europe is fairly unknown. Like it's still not very mainstream substance. In certain countries, like let's say Netherlands or Belgium, Czech Republic, where laws are slightly more drug friendly, or say Spain or Portugal, kratom slowly is becoming something fairly known. But usually the attitude of the countries that are very conservative about drug-related policies is to just ban it without even listening to what's going on. Like we are hoping that eventually we will be able to get to national regulators through United Nations Committee on Drug Narcotics. So UNCND. That's the abbreviation. Certainly, all this alpha abbreviation of like different agencies are so complicated and very difficult to remember. So
Yeah.
we are hoping that eventually we will be able to talk with some national regulations through UNCND, and then we will get access directly to like different national agencies, and through that we will try also to lobby our way into different national decision makers.
Okay. Wow. Um, do you said that when the World Health Organization kind of took this up, which was around the time I started the podcast and the European
Mhm.
Kratom Alliance started up,
Mhm.
you said that it was like chaos and nobody really knew what was going to happen.
Yes, it
Were
was a
you,
complete chaos.
it was complete chaos. Like what do you mean by that? And how did it, with their ultimate decision being not to do a critical review of it, was that what you were expecting ultimately, or was it really up in the air?
Okay, so generally before we started a European Kratom Alliance, we started with a very simple website that I had put together literally in like 2 afternoons,
Wow.
which was called kratomban.eu. You can quickly check it. It's a very, very primitive and crude website. And this is eventually how we started gathering like different people to subscribe to our newsletter. Eventually, we ended up with something like 120 people who subscribed to the newsletter. But the problem is that, as I said, European market is very fragmented. Vendors don't talk to each other, and they don't
Mm.
know each other. Like the national border, despite that in modern day Europe, or at least in the European Union, crossing the border doesn't really feel like anything special. It's just like crossing state border, and then you notice that people start talking like in different language.
Mm.
I live actually in a quite funny area because we are on border of three countries. If I go 4 kilometers to the west, eventually I will end up in Belgium. And Belgium is a bilingual country. So depending on that, where I will exit in Belgium, people will be speaking either in Dutch or in French. If I go to east, I'm going to Germany. And in Germany, people speak German. Like here in Netherlands, also people speak Dutch. But then I live also in a city where pretty much 30% of our population doesn't speak Dutch, and their first language is English because of university and a big amount of expats. So it's definitely quite interesting environment over here. And I would use this to illustrate the problem that we have with different vendors in Europe, because say we will have vendors who are based in Spain, then we will have some vendors who are based in the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, or Hungary. And for example, when German and Austrian vendors will know about each other because of common language and common culture, for example, Dutch vendors will have very bleak idea about what's happening in Germany and vice versa.
Mm.
But then when it comes to Spain and the Czech Republic, they will be completely off the radar because well, the languages are just so different than where the most of Kratom is being sold. So mostly Germany and Netherlands. That basically it was I think maybe like 3 weeks ago that we realized that there is a huge Kratom scene happening in Czech Republic and also until very recently in Slovakia.
Wow. Wow. So many things that I've never thought about before. Um,
Mhm.
is is there, so with that kind of lack of communication between vendors, um, I think that we in the US there's a number of vendors that pretty much all know each other, are aware of what they're doing,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
a few major ones, but there's a number of them. Um, with that aspect going on in Europe, is there a somewhat of a cohesive kratom community, or is it kind of fragmented or dispersed, and this is kind of like the start of one? Because I mean, I could say that in the US, I didn't know of any kratom community before the US tried to ban it in 2016. And then after that, it was like everyone stood up and said, don't ban it. And then they looked at each other and were like, oh, we're all on the same page. And that was kind of the beginning of a community. So
Yeah, like over here, I would say we're like 6 years behind you, or maybe even eight. Because generally,
wow.
when it comes to kratom, as I said before, it's not very known in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have these problems with language barriers, cultural barriers. So generally, what we can do, and we are trying to gather everybody. Like at the moment, we are trying to gather as many vendors as we can, and eventually later down the year we will be negotiating what will be our GMP formulation for kratom. We will try to come up with some legislative proposals and legislative packages in order to support legalization and regulation of kratom in different European countries. But basically, we are still a very small organization, and gathering people takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a really fascinating thing to think about. The difference in situation with kratom communities, and I like that the symbolism of being 6 to 8 years behind. Is it full of potential though too?
Yeah, like there's a lot of potential happening over there. Like, I will be honest, for me, this is like a very big break in terms of career,
Mm,
because uh, before I was usually working on some different projects, and also I was volunteering quite a lot for different political organizations, different international youth movements. So I'm fairly accustomed of dealing with high-level politicians and being in, how we call it, the salons of the elite.
yeah.
I'm fairly accustomed with doing this sort of stuff, but this is pretty much first time when I have liberty in terms of creation, entire process, like how we are going to negotiate with the government, and it's a very big learning curve. Like for example, when we were preparing some legislative proposals for Czech Republic, I had to take 3 weeks just to study about lobbying culture in Czech Republic. Otherwise,
Wow.
our project could have just been derailed over there.
Wow.
And then also we are collaborating with our local sister organization, which is Czechoslovakian Kratom Association. They have formed literally 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So we will be very much collaborating with them on the legislative proposals in Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Wow. Yeah, I'm a policy nerd, so I'm so excited to hear about all this, and it just sounds amazing. What do you think the future of kratom looks like in Europe, and what would you like to see happen? You could give it a time frame of like the next 10 years, the next 20, but what would you like to see happen in the short term and long term?
Okay, like basically anything for us that is long term will be even 1 year, because we're not really sure what's gonna happen within 1 year. Like
Right.
making calls on like 27 different national government and European Union at the same time is a very difficult task. Like monitoring the legislation here, there, and there is fairly complicated, and there are no tools that allow actually for monitoring all of that. Like there are specific monitoring tools for European Union. And say for European Union, I am not very scared, because with European Union, this will take at least 2 to 3 years before a kratom will come on their radar, and it will be also a little bit of time before they will start working on some legislation on that. So by that time, we should be ready with like a complete legislation package where we will be able to just propose to European institutions that, okay, this is what we want to do. This is the research that we have conducted. This is the newest science. And also as organization, we try to collaborate with a big number of scientists on Kratom. So we always have like the new science available to us.
Mm-hmm.
We know what we're dealing with, but generally when it comes to monitoring like the national governments, that's a freaking nightmare because there's a language barrier. You have to really get somebody who knows the language or can understand the language. And then eventually, once you get to know what is the situation over there, then you have to map different stakeholders, different organizations, institutions, check who is in charge of the national drug policies, and so on and so on. So basically, like the first stage of preparing everything is already complicated, and then entering negotiations. Well, we're gonna see how it will go because honestly, I have no clue how it's gonna work.
Wow.
So it's really difficult to predict for me at this stage what will happen to Kratom. Like we hope that our first two legislation, we will have like two legislative project proposals in Central Europe. So we are hoping that this will eventually work out. And then eventually in year one, we will try to overturn one of the prohibitions that happened a long time ago in one of the bigger European countries. Also, I should mention that, so except European Union, we also plan to cover United Kingdom, which is not really part of the EU anymore, but because it's a big market or potentially big market, we definitely also want to enter over there.
Yeah, that's an important distinction to make because I know that on a lot of the forums that I see online, when people are talking about Kratom, so many people are in the UK. And so I can imagine the market there is untapped. It's pretty large. And, you know, I think, is there a way that people can contribute to the European Kratom Alliance? Is there a way people can donate? I certainly want to boost that, so I want to share a link if there is one. If there isn't,
we're still working on that.
Okay.
Like we're still working on that. This has to do with our legal situation. We are a non-profit that is registered in the Netherlands. However, Netherlands has a very strong money anti-laundering rules. So whereas opening a bank account for a private person or a regular company takes literally seconds, we have to go through a very scrutinous process of being checked for every single potential thing before eventually bank will grant us a bank account. So I believe now we are in like 4th or 5th week of waiting for a proper bank account, which is really insane. And I can say that on the air, it completely drives me nuts because I have not expected that kind of obstacle coming from just bureaucracy of the bank. Like I was expecting that, say, government will be more problematic than banks, who usually are very glad to take somebody's money.
Yeah, you would think. And you're a nonprofit. That's crazy.
Yeah, like this is really insane. I don't really understand what's going on over here, but this is my problem right now to deal with it.
Well, once you have that figured out, reach out to me. We'll get the link out there and want people to support this.
I will be very happy to do.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Like, is there anything that we should be looking out for? It sounds like we should be waiting and hoping and crossing our fingers about these first two pieces of legislation that you're talking about. Is that what we should be looking for? in the
Yes,
future?
like this is pretty much the first thing that we should be looking for,
Okay.
because within first 6 months, so like I believe by the end of June, maybe end of July, we want to have kratom fully legalized and regulated in one country, and then in second country we want to overturn recent prohibition with similar legislation package that we are currently working on. So depending on that, what's going to happen, we will definitely try to deal with this sort of stuff. And once this is done, we will definitely go full steam ahead and start expanding, because still as organization we are fairly small. Like our team is literally less than 5 people currently,
Yeah. Wow.
and I am pretty much a person who is in charge of doing entire legislation package, doing research, talking with different governments, preparing this, that, brokering different connections. Also, I am the one who is in charge with American Kratom Association. So, say I have my hands full with everything.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Wow. Well,
But
yeah.
like Kennedy said, we're not doing this because it's easy, but we're doing this because it's difficult.
Good quote. Good quote. Definitely, and it's worthwhile work, and you're doing it, and it's amazing. And I think that everyone should look out and definitely support you when they can. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
It's my pleasure.
It's great to have you on, and maybe we can do it again sometime soon. Get an update from you.
Yes, like I will be very happy to update you once we are pretty much fully set up, and we will have our first successes on our account. Then we will be very happy to talk about that. But maybe also we should circle back a little bit to the decision of WHO, because
Yes.
I believe I forgot to speak about that. So generally, when it comes to the decision of WHO and then not starting the critical review process, this is something that across the board everybody is very happy about. Mm, uh, Also, we pretty much knew about this before American Kratom Association, which is very funny, because I would expect that Mac Haddo, who is a person with over 40 years of experience in like public policy and generally dealing with like state government, federal government, etc., would have his fingers already at the UN and would be able to get this information beforehand. So I remember just calling him and saying, "Hey, Mac, listen, there is a decision of WHO, and it's good. We don't have to be afraid of anything for at least the next 2 years."
Wow. Wait, you're the person who told Mac Haddow?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Also, if you've been following Kratom subreddit, I was the person who has published the results of the review.
Oh, really? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow,
like
wow.
I'm doing quite a lot of covered stuff.
I had no idea I was meeting with a celebrity today. This is great.
Oh, I didn't even knew that I was a celebrity.
Oh, you are
Well,
now.
I know that I am a meme in certain countries, but that's a reason for probably off the record conversation.
Well, I definitely got to hear about that on personal time. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. This has just been great, and let's do it again.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. Thank you for hosting me, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Yeah.